Hi, I'm Femi OK. Today on the stream, is the legal right for women in the United States to have an abortion about to be restricted? US Supreme Court justices are debating right now whether Roe versus Wade, that landmark case that granted a constitutional right to an abortion in the US, they are debating whether that should be overturned. So our discussion today is not about the rights and the morality of abortions, but it is about the ramifications if Roe versus Wade is overturned.
If and when Roe versus Wade is overruled in the United States, it will not only impact access to abortion care, but will likely impact access to birth control. There'll be an increased need and demand for contraceptives, particularly emergency contraceptives like Plan B, which should be available over the counter in the United States. And we need to ensure all women and girls across all communities, especially communities of color at high risk for unintended pregnancy, have access to affordable birth control and emergency contraceptives.
So we have legal experts lined up to talk to you to explain what the ramifications might be if the constitutional right for an legal abortion in the United States, if that goes away as early as next month. On YouTube, you can ask questions, you can put your comments, they're very, very welcome. Please use the comment section here. We're waiting for your questions. Now, let me introduce you to our legal experts. We have Lydia Wheeler, we have Professor Goodwin and Professor Sapper. Really good to have all of you all here. Lydia, please introduce yourself to our international audience.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here. I'm Lydia Wheeler. I'm a senior legal reporter at Bloomberg Law, and I cover healthcare litigation.
Good to have you. Michelle, lovely to have you here on the stream. Please introduce yourself to the stream viewers.
Thank you. I'm a chancellor's professor at the University of California, Irvine, as well as a senior lecturer at Harvard Medical School, author of the book Policing the Womb, Invisible Women and the Criminalization of Motherhood.
And good to have you, and lovely to see you, Liz, as well. Welcome to the conversation. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Liz Sepper. I'm a professor of law at the University of Texas at Austin, in the heart of the state where an abortion ban is currently in place.
I am wondering, Guess, 50 years of having a constitutional right to an abortion, and now we're discussing what might happen if this is overruled. How do you explain, I'm really interested in all of your take on this. Lydia, you can start. How do you explain where we are right now? How is this possible?
Well, we're pretty surprised that the Supreme Court's draft opinion was leaked to begin with. So that's where we are. This has never happened in the court's modern day history, that we have seen what the internal deliberations of the Supreme Court are. So that's how we got to where we are today with, a clue into what the justices might do here, which is they're signaling that they're planning to overturn this precedent decision from 1973. And it's pretty clear if that happens, what the future looks like is that abortion access will depend on what state you live in.
Mm-hmm. Michelle, you're nodding. Go ahead. Add some more, please.
Well, I see this as the coming of the new Jane Crow. And what that means is that in the United States, following slavery, Black people still had second-class citizenship that was instantiated by the United States Supreme Court, upholding state laws that denied Black people full participation in government and society. And what we see if the Supreme Court does go ahead and dismantle Roe v. Wade will be a new Jane Crow, meaning that for women, it will be a matter of second-class citizenship, quite literally, and even quite deadly for many women who are Black and brown in the United States, because the U.S. already is 55th in the world in terms of maternal mortality, and states in the U.S. such as Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas are considered the deadliest places in the entire, air quote, developed world to even be pregnant.
Liz, how can... Yeah, you go first, Liz. You go first. Go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
I wanted to jump in that I think everything that's been said is right on. I just don't know that I was so surprised. I was surprised by the leak. I wasn't surprised by the fact that the Supreme Court wants to overturn Roe v. Wade and plans to do so. And part of that has to do with the fact that Texas has had in place a law that bans abortion after the 6-week mark, really after someone is 2 or 3 weeks pregnant, since September 1st. And that's because the Supreme Court let Texas do that, let us go ahead with an abortion ban. So to some extent, we're already seeing the repercussions here in the state of Texas. Now, it's a bit different from a full overturning of Roe v. Wade because people can travel to Oklahoma or Louisiana still while Roe exists.
Well, and there's a deeper time period there too, which maybe we can talk about.
Please.
Yeah, well, that deeper time period, I mean, I agree with you, Liz, that this is not something that is surprising. And for me, it's not surprising just because of Texas's SB 8. It's not surprising given the second-class citizenship of Black and brown women in the United States and the fact that even in the 1980s and 90s, there were Black women in places like South Carolina, North Carolina, and other states that were being dragged out of hospitals in shackles and chains and were significantly ignored by reproductive rights movements because these were not matters of abortion, but yet central to questions of reproductive justice. So I agree with you in many ways. It is not surprising because in many ways, Black women have been the canaries in the coal mine. And this has been something that certainly those who've been working in reproductive justice have been waving a flag about for a couple decades now.
That's right. And if I could just interject here,
Sure.
It's clear that abortion is going to be legal based on what state you're in. What's not clear right now is whether states are going to be able to do anything to stop the residents that they have from traveling across their borders to another state where it's still legal to just get the procedure there. And that raises some interesting questions and some very untested areas of law. So I think we are likely to see many more legal fights ahead over abortion. I know that the Supreme Court with this decision is kind of really hoping that it washes its hands of abortion and doesn't ever have to deal with another abortion case ever again. I think that the Supreme Court would love it if that were the case. But I think if they overturn Roe v. Wade here, that they're just opening up the door for a lot more legal challenges.
So, Lydia, how is it possible for the Supreme Court in the US to already make a precedent and then overturn that precedent? How is that possible?
I mean, usually it's something that they say that they don't like to do, is that that this is always a question that's brought up when we think about Supreme Court nominees. And, those are people who the president elects to the bench. Trump has had several appointments and they were all asked, do you respect the Supreme Court's prior decisions? And they all always say, yes, we do. So it's not very common that they overturn themselves. It seems like this is happening more frequently, but this would be a big upheaval if they do that here, since we've had this law, a constitutional right to abortion, on the books since 1973.
I want to basically brainstorm with you and just get your thoughts on what might happen. What do you feel might happen? Having a look here on my laptop, among those wanting the right to a constitutional abortion kept, overturning Roe versus Wade would move the country in the wrong direction. 84% of people believe that. Be a danger to women. 82% of people believe that. Be a danger to America's rights. 82% of people believe that. Let's start talking about the ramifications. If this happens, Liz, what is your biggest concern that you think this will happen June or July 2022? Go ahead.
I think my first initial concern is the one that Michelle raised, that Black women, Indigenous women, Hispanic women are canaries in the coal mine. Poor women generally are more likely to be immediately impacted. And that's certainly what we've seen across the board. This isn't the first time a state has restricted abortion. We have many, many abortion restrictions in place. We have prohibitions on funding for abortion for poor women. And we know that those restrictions have had real impact on poor women and Black women, Indigenous immigrant women as well.
Liz, can you spell that out a little bit more? Because if you live in the United States, you absolutely get that. You understand what life is like for minorities and for people who do not have as many resources as many Americans. What does that actually mean? if in June Roe versus Wade is overturned, if you're poor?
Yeah, I don't think actually that Americans really understand what poor women and racialized minorities go through in the United States.
Good point.
But if Roe is overturned, for poor women, what this means is already abortion is very expensive. There's not insurance coverage for abortion. So that poor women who find themselves pregnant unexpectedly need to scramble to gather resources. Even medication abortion, which is time limited, is very expensive, about $500 just for getting the abortion pills. And so what this basically means is poor women have to pay for the procedure. They're going to have to pay for travel. They have to work out childcare. They lose wages because they have to take off time from work. So it's sort of a snowball of various costs just for the procedure itself. And that's for those people lucky enough, capable enough to be able to get access to the procedure.
And I should add here, if I can, that, abortion medication, those are pills that the FDA has regulated and says that you can take and is safe and effective to terminate a pregnancy up until 10 weeks. Those are actually things that states are already working to limit. There are states that have bans on them being sent by the mail. There are also restrictions that states have passed that require them to be dispensed by a physician in person. And so that limits a woman's ability to do a telehealth appointment and get a prescription that way and get it filled at their pharmacy. So we're already seeing restrictions in place just for medication abortion, and that's going to be another area where we're likely to see legal challenges.
Michelle, I was listening to one of your podcasts recently. It was about telemedicine and also using drugs via as sold to you so that you can have an abortion at home. Basically, it's another method of doing it without having to go into a facility. Your podcast is reporting, rebelling, telling, kind of sums up your approach to this entire situation. The idea that people are using telemedicine and using drugs in order to work out how to create their own abortion without having to go into a facility before this challenge to Roe versus Wade tells me something about where the United States is right now. Can you tell us more?
Sure. Well, 2 points that I'd make there is that, one, abortions are very safe. The World Health Organization has compared the safety of an abortion to a penicillin shot. In the United States, a woman is 14 times more likely to die by carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion. Medication abortions have been a significant feature in how women are terminating pregnancies in the United States. It's incredibly safe. And there have been times in which it's been subjected to a kind of political football match during the Trump administration. Mifepristone and basically drugs that are used to terminate pregnancies were singled out amongst more than 20,000 drugs as the only one where a person had to go in person in order to receive it. That's since changed now that Biden is in office, but it is one of the ways in which women may seek to terminate pregnancies. But I want to go back to the prior point in terms of what comes next. And I think we can't emphasize it enough, these very high rates of maternal mortality and maternal morbidity in the United States. In Louisiana, a woman is 57 times more likely to die by carrying a pregnancy to term than by terminating it. In Mississippi, a Black woman is 118 times more likely to die by carrying a pregnancy to term than by having an abortion. Now, this can be a matter that anyone can decide for themselves. But what is really a tragedy here is to see in these very states that have had histories of human enslavement and trafficking in human beings, and then Jim Crow, that in these very states, knowing those very stark death rates, that they would force women in those states to carry pregnancies to term. It is unbelievable.
Okay, so let me just bring in here Paula Johnson. Paula Johnson is a professor of law at Syracuse University, and she told us and made this point just a few hours ago. Let's have a listen.
The government should not have any role in those kinds of decisions, particularly where women's lives can often be held in the balance where we're not just talking about whether or not someone carries a pregnancy to term, but whether or not someone's life and health can be at issue. For Black women and women of color in particular, that's a major issue because our health care has always been something that has been disparate in this society. So that would simply compound this. It would reverse a situation where the life of the mother would be paramount, and her decision making about her own body and about her own future in life.
I did promise you on YouTube that you could be part of this conversation. Thank you for your questions and your comments so far. Guess I'm going to ask you to speedily reply to them. Lydia, I'm going to give you this one from Lance. When will the Supreme Court make a decision? What is the date? Do you know it, Lydia?
So we never know when the Supreme Court's decisions are going to come down. We know all they do is they announce what day are going to be opinion days, but we don't ever know what we're going to get. What we do know is that the Supreme Court term runs from October to usually the end of June. And they have, I think, about 60 cases left that they need to issue opinions for. And so we had an opinion day earlier this week. There could be more announced this week, potentially next week. So before the end of June, hopefully, but it could stretch into the beginning of July before we get a decision on Roe v. Wade. And usually for these big blockbuster cases, we call them, these the cases on hot button issues that are going to have big impact. Those are usually the type of cases that the Supreme Court holds until the very end.
All right, so let me give this one to Liz. This one comes from C. Dassa, watching right now. Thank you. If they overturn Roe versus Wade, they could overturn any Supreme Court decision that they don't like. It's dangerous. Liz, could that happen?
That might overstate the case. Lots of people are very concerned about the draft opinion because it says that the Constitution in the United States, in what we call the substantive due process clause, which is basically a clause that protects the citizens of states from fundamental rights infringement. So what fundamental rights are part of substantive due process? The Supreme Court has determined things like the right to marry, the right to raise children, the right to parent, the right to contraception and to abortion. The draft opinion says that what should be considered fundamental are only those rights that are deeply rooted in the history and tradition of our nation. And the draft says abortion is not one of those rights, and actually suggests that the right to privacy and bodily autonomy is not part of what's protected by history and tradition. So they look back to the 18th century, the 19th century, and say, was abortion one of the rights we recognized? And not surprisingly, the answer is essentially no.
When women were viewed as property, and actually were property. Let me just go to, just picking up from what you said, Liz, let me put this one to you, Michelle. This one comes from Leslie, who's watching right now. If they overturn Roe versus Wade, don't you think that they might go after gay or interracial marriage? Which is kind of what Liz was saying as well. Is that possible?
It's entirely possible. It is, because even
though... But it would be outrageous, Michelle. Who would do that?
It would be. Well, county clerks, right? So even though Justice Alito in this leaked draft opinion says that there are guardrails around that, that's more illusory than real, because all it takes is a local county clerk who's inspired by the signaling from the court to say, well, I will refuse to issue a marriage license to this same-sex couple. I'll refuse to issue a marriage license to this interracial couple. I'll refuse to certify the adoption that this couple that's Jewish wants to have because the children they're adopting happen to be Christian. And we've already seen this, so that even though the Supreme Court says they're guardrails, many cases don't make their way to the United States Supreme Court. So many things are really quite local. So long as a clerk refuses and a local judge upholds that, or a family doesn't go further than that because they're disheartened, then we already see the dismantling of those rights too.
Lydia, again, I'm just looking at this source from CBS and YouGov, looking at the polls that they did with Americans to see where they felt the Supreme Court should fall regarding Roe versus Wade and if it should be overruled. 64% keep it as it is, 36% overturn it. If those 36% get their way, if the justices decide to overturn Roe versus Wade, what are the other ripple effects beyond the impact on women and girls and families? What else might be impacted?
Well, I think Michelle hit it a little bit there, that, you know, and as well as Liz, about the reasoning in this decision, this draft decision, saying that this is a right that's not deeply rooted in the Constitution. And, you know, if that's the case, then that same argument progressives think could be made for a host of other things, including the right to contraceptives, the right to gay marriage. You know, another interesting thing about this decision is also just the other type of abortion restrictions that this could pave the way for. So in this decision, the conservative majority said, you know, look, abortion isn't a right that's rooted in the Constitution, but, you know, we think that states have an interest in protecting rights. And so that's why we're going to, you know, overturn Roe v. Wade. And, you know, if states have, all they have to do is say that they have this interest, and the interest is in protecting life, or whatever the interest is, then there could be a lot of other things that are put forth that states could do, just to say we're doing this because we have an interest in X, Y, or Z.
Yes, I want to bring in one more voice, if I may, Professor Michelle. Do excuse me. One more voice. And this is from Dr. Salas. And I think it's really intriguing to have a doctor's voice in this conversation, because there's a medical aspect to what might happen that I hadn't even considered. But of course, medical practitioners have to. Here's Dr. Salas.
If Roe versus Wade is overturned, of course, this will restrict access to abortion in the United States. That's the intention. It is predicted that more than half of states will enact bans or restrictions in that circumstance. This will disproportionately impact those who already have less access to resources, and that includes people in rural areas, people of low income, and Black and Latina people and other people of color. This inherent disparity in health outcomes and access concerns me greatly as a physician. I also worry about how we're going to train the next generation of people who will provide abortion care. If half of our training programs are in states where abortion is not allowed, who will be trained to provide abortions in the future?
I hadn't considered about the training for states that then go to a fully restricted, you cannot have an abortion in this state. Where will the new doctors, the new practitioners learn how to actually do this procedure? That hadn't occurred to me. Something that did occur to me, though, is that whenever we have a conversation that is involving abortion, we have a split in our audience between those who are for abortion rights and those who are not for abortion rights. So, what would you say to the audience that says that they are pro-life and they think that overturning Roe versus Wade is a good idea? How might that impact them, Liz? And then Michelle, and then Lydia.
I think that the pro-life approach needs to recognize the lives of people who are pregnant and can become pregnant. Right now we're going through a moment where the anti-abortion movement has recognized a win, right? They see the win on the horizon, and there's talk about, well, maybe we should have policies that support families. Maybe we should have health care for people. But these are all policies the anti-abortion forces have opposed for years. So I think we really need to think more deeply about what it means to be pro-life, just like we need to really think deeply about the role of religion, I think, in U.S. society, which is driving a lot of these changes, but where it doesn't acknowledge that we have differences in religious beliefs, but many religious people in the United States share a basic conviction that other people's religion shouldn't control your decisions about family formation and bodily.
We're right at the very end of this show. Professor Michelle Goodwin, this is a terrible thing to ask you, but I'm going to ask you, in a sentence, what do you think might happen in June?
In June, I think that the United States Supreme Court will dismantle Roe v. Wade, and we will see half the states in this country either fully denying abortion rights or significantly limiting them.
Professor Michelle Goodwin, Professor Liz Sepper, Lydia Wheeler, thank you so much for helping us understand the legal ramifications if Roe versus Wade is overturned. Thank you for your community questions as well on YouTube. Appreciate you. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.